Hi out there in the YouTube and welcome back to my channel. In this video I want to talk about the egregore takeover of this flat plane. Now, egregore, I really want you to understand this concept, is like a thought form, and you can think of it in scientific left brain way of thinking as like a series of synapses that are fired that equal a thought. Um, Language is a good example of that. And versus the opposite side, where um, like through our facial and our emotional side, like which is intuitive and doesn't really necessarily have a language per se, but it does have like an emotional response. And both, in order to be whole in their thinking, um, you need to use both. And okay, so with the takeover, well, many of you may have heard of the Inquisition, and like there's a lot of um, different inquisitions that occurred. They have different names. They're not all called inquisitions, but the expansion of the road system and technical society. And this is basically 200 years ago, like from 1821. And the dark areas are areas that are savages, according to the legend. I'll post a more clear picture that shows this, but any of the dark areas in the map, savages. And it starts around Italy and London, where they were called enlightened. They considered themselves enlightened. So, but yes, if you think of our modern day thinking of how a garden, a unique species that exists in the jungle, in the rainforests, pristine, untouched, well, we shouldn't go and harm its environment, right? Well, what about someone's like ancient culture that goes back thousands of years? Like in India, that's depicted here as being what was it, half civilized? Yeah, half civilized. Um, as well as Egypt, which was considered half civilized. And yes, from these different areas of the world, from Egypt and India, that is where we are given the nakshatras and the 12 zodiac. So that's very important to consider, and also then to consider what those people also taught about the physical world, um, not just in their spiritual teachings about astrology, which were very, and still are, not were and still are, um, very accurate about a person's character and nature. So it's important then to consider and be thankful and grateful for any information download or like completion of language barrier, because if you can't even speak their language but through translations can understand the Upanishads and biblical writings from their people, then it will give a much deeper understanding into life. And that's, I think, pretty important. So, we're 200 years from when this came out. And that's Australia. And like me and Tristan took a trip there, and we went from Perth to Melbourne, and Sydney, all the way across the lower coastline. But back then, they like had just started to take over, because it was all mostly savages. Like we hadn't, Does any of that make sense to you? And the irony Like, just because they say something is in God's will, like you want to call bloodshed and massacring. Like, if you look into the Inquisition, especially like in Australia and New Zealand and Tasmania and all that, it even said that in most instances, the natives, native meaning indigenous and um, from that area, that they only really caused conflict when we expanded. Well, that's because to them many of the lands were sacred, and still are, that we have built our homes upon. And not enough thanks, I think, is given for this, because if you consider how far we've come in just such a short time period, really, and then we want to consider ourselves like superior, like, I mean, Egypt and all of that, in India, it's all considered like barbaric or not civilized. But just because our system's built much more on materialism and, like, bench and like things that have names on them that give them prestige, like, and you know it's the same with the flat earth. Like, a lot of people don't really consider that when they think about it, but other than pictures or anything that's seen on, like, that box in front of you, like, can't really, like, prove anything because it's just a TV box. Like, you know, gosh, the camera, it's like possessed. I keep trying to fix it. Yeah, just think of how far we've come, and like, can we not be thankful for what we do have, and like maybe like leave the areas that are still pristine, which are not that many, like Sentinel Island. Like, and the only reason Sentinel Island is still like pristine is because they will spear anyone. Like, and they're like giants. That's why it's called Sentinel. Like, because they're really big and they aren't friendly at all. So, you know, offering our poisons in kindness, just if they assimilate, because they are wrong, and like isn't really, they deserve to be educated, and therefore we should intervene and interfere with their thousands of year developing culture, which, like I said in earlier with the plants, is that, like, would you want something to become extinct? Well, it's more than just a genetic bloodline. It's a thought. It's a way of being. And when ours just like comes over and, like, paves paradise and puts up a parking lot, then it's really not fair, especially when you do not take into consideration the other peoples native to the land, what they think about the land. Instead, like when we came from overseas and just totally, like, wiped it all out and brought all our sicknesses, like, because that's mainly what contributed a lot to the wipeout during the Inquisitions, because we brought a lot of germs with us when we came overseas, and apparently they got sick a lot, so that helped, along with us shooting all the strong ones. But yeah, now it's with the Catholics and all that, so it seems very much like, peace, love, and light, even though, like, they're built upon the foundations of rot and murder. Like, I mean, when you see some of these images of, like, old churches and monasteries, think about children that were ripped away from their parents, who then the parents were shot in the heads because they wouldn't conform. And then the children were brought in and indoctrinated in these school systems, which back in the day, there wasn't the separation of church and state. So the government and church, or like school and church were not separated. They were one in the same. So, and they're both just language. Like math is a language. And just like how people have in biblical writing, it's a language. But language can say anything is the thing. So that's why a lot of times with like globe people, they have a lot of math and models. Look that up, mathematical models that model a situation, and but they don't prove them just by like, if something is repeatable through scientific observation, then that's a really good formula. But if it's a lot of it is based upon conjecture and like, building theories upon theories where you have to substitute constants or like unknown variables, which we assume their value, to prove a statement, doesn't really, it's just a language. Like that, like if you like see this giant formula, it's like because we said so. Like if you sum it up, like versus biblical, which that is the kind of the same, but I think that we are in the age of the Kali Yuga. So even though I am spiritual, it doesn't mean that I bow to the Christian God, um, which is very, in many ways, corporate and is responsible for a lot of death. And I don't understand how people are just like, oh, forgive and forget. No, you can forgive, and I do forgive y'all, all of you, but and all of your forefathers. It's not, you only did that because of expectations and your thought forms. Thought you were being noble. But you invaded in lands that you weren't from, and don't respect those lands in the ways that the people who were there thousands of years, how they did. And that's how they were able to maintain it and keep it pristine. It wasn't because they were savage. It was because they don't manipulate and change the world in such a way that we do through our thought form. But, you know, if it's like a rare orchid, this beautiful flower of thought, why do we want to wipe it out? Right? Even if we are in the age of Kali Yuga, in many people I know there's still that like divine spark of life. And like you can see it being squelched. You can see it being put out. Because it's going to continue to do so. Sorry, but that's my view. I think it is. Um, it's going to continue to dim. Not to be pessimistic, but it's like when it's autumn, when it's fall. I don't think I'm pessimistic to say that winter's coming. Like, because in the Kali Yuga, which like they were from the Vedic or Indian teachings, which have been around far longer than our societies, they understood these shifts of consciousness, and Krishna left a long time ago, way before the British Empire and like the the Roman Catholic Church and Inquisitions and all this kind of stuff. But just try to respect nature and respect thoughts, egregores that exist in people as unique as the garden. And they've chosen the thoughts that cultivate the garden that creates their mind. And who are you to prune it or weed it, pick things out? You're not the same. So, yeah, all you can do is try to share your garden. You know what I mean? That's share your thoughts. And yeah, I think that's a good thing to do. But I hope you enjoyed this video, going a little long there. So, mwah, love y'all, and subscribe if you're new, and give me a thumbs up. And I'll see you in the future.